The galaxy was wide, endless, and filled with life. Thousands of civilizations had risen under different suns, building cities of light, traveling between stars, and sharing their stories with one another. Some species became strong, building empires. Some grew wise, choosing peace and art. And some, like the people of Vera, lived quiet lives far from the storms of war. The Verans were gentle beings. They were small, their bodies light and delicate, with skin that shimmered in soft colors like glass touched by sunlight. They lived in harmony with their oceans and forests, and their cities were made of crystal towers that sang when the wind touched them. For thousands of years they had known only peace. Violence was something from old stories, half forgotten, told only to remind children why kindness mattered. Weapons were things of the past. Their ships were made for travel and study, not for battle. Their healers spent more time growing flowers than treating wounds. But peace, as the galaxy often learned, does not last forever. The invaders came from the void, sudden and merciless. The Karzul, a race born for conquest. Their warships were black as ash, their weapons burning with cruel fire. They did not come to trade, or to speak, or even to threaten. They came only to take. The first colony world of the Verans was captured within days. Cities of crystal turned to dust. Families were torn apart, dragged into the holds of the enemy ships. The Verans had no armies, no soldiers, and no way to fight back. Fear spread across Vera like a storm. Their people were not ready for this. They had never built weapons of war. They had never trained their youth to fight. For the first time in all their history, they faced a truth that broke their hearts. They were not strong enough to survive. Their leaders gathered in the great crystal hall of the capital city. The walls shook with distant thunder as more reports of burning colonies came in. Faces that once glowed with hope now flickered with despair. One elder spoke with trembling voice. "We cannot win. If we resist, we will only suffer longer." Another whispered, "Perhaps we should surrender. Perhaps slavery is better than extinction." But among them was one voice, quiet yet steady. She was called Leora, a leader not of power, but of spirit. She rose and looked at the council, her eyes filled with sorrow but also a fragile spark of hope. "If we surrender now, we give our children to chains. If we vanish, no one will remember us. But perhaps the stars will hear us. Perhaps there are others who will not turn away." The council hesitated. The galaxy was full of old empires, yes, but the Verans were a small people. They had little to offer. Why would anyone come to risk their lives for them? Why would anyone fight against the Karzul, who even the strong feared? Still, despair left them with only one choice. That night, the Verans sent a plea to the stars. Across the great networks of communication, they broadcasted their cry for help. It was not a demand, not a command, not even a bargain. It was simply a voice trembling with fear, begging for mercy. "To any who can hear, we are the people of Vera. We are under attack by the Karzul. We have no weapons. We have no armies. We are healers, builders, and dreamers. If you have strength, if you have mercy, please, help us. Do not let us be destroyed." The signal went out, crossing light years, leaping between stations and satellites, echoing into the unknown. And then, silence. The days that followed were long and cruel. The Verans waited, but no answer came. Their people grew quieter with each sunrise, their hope fading like the last glow of twilight. Some prayed, some wept, some simply sat in silence. The stars above, so bright and eternal, seemed colder now, and in their hearts the Verans began to believe what many had whispered in fear. No one would come. They were too small, too weak, too unimportant, but the galaxy has a way of surprising those who lose hope. The Verans did not know it yet, but far away on a wild blue planet under a golden sun their message had been heard. And though the ones who heard it were not gentle, not soft, and not peaceful like them, they were something far stronger. They were humans, and they were already on their way. For many days, the people of Vera watched the skies in silence. Every hour they listened for a reply, but the stars gave them nothing. Hope began to crumble. Parents held their children close, trying not to show fear, though their trembling hands gave them away. Elders whispered prayers that went unanswered. And then, one evening, as the twin moons rose above the capital, a sound broke through the crystal halls of the main communication tower. It was rough, loud, and nothing like the smooth voices of the elder races they had heard before. It was a signal. The Veran engineers rushed to clear the static. The voice came through, strange, sharp, with heavy breaths between words. It was not soft, it was not elegant. It carried the weight of stone and fire. "This is the United Nations Emergency Response Fleet. We received your distress call. Hold on. We're coming." The message repeated in their language, translated by machines. But even with translation, the tone remained harsh. The words felt heavy, almost frightening. The council gathered again, their faces pale. "Who are they?" one elder asked, her voice shaking. The archives were searched. Records from old starfarers, forgotten files hidden deep in the galactic networks, whispers exchanged in secret forums, and slowly, a name returned. Humans, a young species, born from a planet many had called cursed, a death world, a place where storms ripped across continents, where beasts with teeth of iron hunted in packs, where the ground shook with fire and the seas raged with fury. Most life could not survive. There yet humans had not only survived, they had thrived. The records were short, scattered, and colored with fear. Some called humans clever, adaptable, and unyielding. Others called them reckless, violent, and dangerous. Many old empires avoided them, warning that Deathworlders were not to be trusted. The council sat in silence. The Varans were healers, builders, gentle people who had never lifted weapons. And now their plea for help had been heard not by the graceful empires, not by the ancient protectors, but by humans, beings who came from a world of endless struggle. One elder whispered, "We asked the stars for help, and the stars sent us monsters." The room grew heavier with those words. Some argued they should refuse the help. What if they come only to conquer us once the Karzul are gone? What if they see our weakness and take Vera for themselves? Others shook their heads. What choice do we have? The Karzul are already at our doors. If we do nothing, we are lost. Leora, the one who had first suggested calling to the stars, stood once again. Her voice was calm, though her heart beat fast. "We do not know these humans. Perhaps they are dangerous. Perhaps they are wild. But they heard us when no one else did. They chose to answer when all others turned away. If we reject them now, then we choose death. If we accept them, there is still hope." The council argued deep into the night. Some cried out in fear, some pleaded for surrender, some begged for trust. In the end, they could not make the choice with certainty. But time itself made the decision for them. For outside, the Karzul armadas were drawing closer. Colony after colony had fallen. Refugees streamed into the capital, their eyes hollow with grief. The skies above were filling with enemy shadows, and then the human fleet arrived. They came not in shining silver crafts like the elder species. Their ships were dark, scarred, and built for battle. They were not beautiful, they were terrifying. Engines roared like thunder, hulls bore marks of old battles, and weapons bristled like teeth of predators. When the Varans saw them, many trembled. Parents clutched their children tighter. Elders bowed their heads, whispering prayers. These were not saviors out of dreams. These were hunters out of nightmares. But the human message came again, carried through the stars. "This is the United Nations fleet. We are here because you called. We are here because you asked for help. We will not leave you to burn." The words were rough, even brutal compared to the soft speech of the Varans. Yet hidden inside those words was something the Varans had never felt before, a promise made of iron. And though fear still clung, To their hearts, a flicker of something else began to stir within them. Could these Deathworlders truly be their saviors? The human fleet entered Veyran space like a storm breaking over calm seas. Their ships were not delicate, not graceful, not shining like silver birds. They were built like walls of iron, each one scarred with the history of battles fought before. Engines growled like beasts and weapons lined their hulls like rows of teeth. The Veyrans watched from the safety of their crystal towers as the ships descended into orbit. To them, the humans looked more frightening than the invaders. The Karzul were cruel, yes, but they were known. They had been studied for generations. The humans were a mystery, a shadow whispered about but never truly seen. When the first human stepped onto Veyran soil, silence fell. He was taller than any Veyran, his frame broad and heavy, his movements strong and steady. His uniform was dark and scarred like his ship. A weapon rested at his side, long and sharp, glowing faintly with power. His face was worn, weathered by battles and years, but his eyes burned with a fire the Veyrans had never seen before. The people trembled. Mothers pulled children behind them. Elders looked away, too afraid to meet his gaze. One leader whispered in fear, "These are not saviors, these are killers." But the human captain raised no weapon. He looked at the fragile people before him, at their shining skin and trembling hands, and his voice came low, deep, and steady. "We are here because you called for help. And we don't leave people to burn." The words were not elegant. They lacked beauty, but they carried something heavier than beauty: truth. Leora, standing among the council, stepped forward. Her body shook, but her voice found courage. You came. You crossed the stars for us." The captain nodded once. "We heard your call." That was enough. The Veyrans stared at him, at the soldiers behind him. They were all cut from the same cloth, strong, scarred, and carrying the weight of survival on their shoulders. Unlike the Veyrans, who lived on a gentle world, the humans had been shaped by storms, by hunger, by fire and ice. They were predators, yes, but they were also protectors. The meeting continued inside the Crystal Hall. The humans were strange to watch. They carried themselves with discipline, but their eyes never rested. Always scanning, always calculating, as though danger could strike at any moment. They did not sit lightly in the delicate chairs. They did not sip the sweet drinks offered to them. They stood like guardians carved from stone, unyielding. One elder asked them with trembling voice, "Why? Why do you risk yourselves for us? We have nothing to give. No armies, no treasures, no power." The captain's eyes softened, though his face remained stern. "Because you asked. Because you needed someone. That's all that matters." The answer struck the Veyrans harder than any weapon. No bargain, no demand, no price. Just a promise. A promise that came from people who knew what it meant to fight for survival. But not all were convinced. A Veyran scholar leaned close to Leora, whispering sharply, "They are predators, can't you see? Look at their eyes. Look at their scars. They know only war. When the Karzul are gone, what if they turn on us? What if we invited one danger to fight another?" Leora did not answer at once. She studied the humans, their strong hands, their restless eyes, the way they stood shoulder to shoulder like a single wall of will. Yes, they were dangerous, but she also remembered the silence of the stars, the refusal of the elder races, the way the galaxy had looked away when Veyra cried for help. And then she remembered who had come. Not the graceful, not the mighty, not the ancient, but these humans. When the meeting ended, the humans returned to their ships to prepare. The Veyrans remained in the hall, heavy with fear, yet touched by a strange new feeling they did not understand. They had seen killers, yes, but killers who stood ready not to destroy them, but to fight for them. The night sky glowed with the flames of human engines, and for the first time since the war began, the Veyrans dared to wonder, perhaps the monsters were not monsters after all. Perhaps they were hope. The Karzul armada entered Veyran space with the confidence of predators. Their ships were massive, dark like moving mountains, armed with weapons that could burn cities to ash. For weeks they had marched across Veyran colonies, crushing every settlement, enslaving thousands. To them, Veyra was already theirs. When they detected the human fleet, they laughed. These ships were small compared to their own. Their hulls were scarred, their engines loud and unrefined. To the Karzul, the humans looked like insects trying to block a flood. Pathetic, one commander sneered. They are nothing but a young race playing at war. But they were wrong. The battle began with a roar. The blackness of space lit up with fire as human ships moved in tight formations. They were not graceful like the fleets of elder empires, but they fought with precision and fury. Every shot counted. Every maneuver was sharp and deliberate. The Karzul unleashed their cannons, burning through the void with rivers of fire. Whole human ships shook under the blasts, hulls breaking, alarms screaming. Yet the humans did not scatter. They closed ranks, shielding one another, taking blows meant for weaker ships. Varans watched the battle unfold through great crystal screens. Their hearts pounded with terror. They saw human ships break apart, saw crew members sacrifice themselves to ram enemy cruisers. They saw boarding pods launched into enemy hulls, small fragile tubes carrying only a handful of human marines. Why do they do this? One Varan whispered in horror. Why do they throw themselves into certain death? And Leora answered softly with tears in her eyes. Because they would rather die than leave us to fall. On the decks of human ships, chaos reigned. Fires roared, metal twisted, blood stained the floors. Yet the soldiers fought with a will that refused to break. A young Marine, wounded and bleeding, pulled himself back to his station. His commander told him to rest, but he shook his head. If I stop now, someone else will die. I can still fight. In another ship, engineers worked with bare hands to keep engines running. Sparks burned their skin, smoke filled their lungs, but still they patched the broken lines. One ship, the UNS Resolute, was struck in the center, engines failing. The captain knew they could not survive. Instead of retreating, he turned the burning vessel directly into the path of a Karzul warship. The collision lit the sky in white fire, destroying both ships. Hundreds of lives were lost, but thousands of Varans were saved. The Karzul began to realize this enemy was different. Other species broke under fear, surrendered when outmatched. But these humans, they did not surrender. They fought like creatures who had been born inside war, shaped by it, hardened until nothing could crush them. Even as their ships burned, they pressed forward. Even as their people died, they refused to retreat. The Karzul commander growled, his claws digging into the arm of his chair. They fight like mad beasts. They throw themselves into the fire without hesitation. This is not war, it is suicide, but he was wrong again. It was not suicide. It was survival sharpened into instinct. It was humanity's greatest weapon, the refusal to give up no matter the cost. From the surface of Vera, the people watched the sky filled with fire. Some cried, some prayed, some simply stood in silence. For the first time in their history, they saw death given freely, not for conquest, not for power, but for protection. The humans bled, burned and fell, but the line held. The Karzul began to retreat, their pride wounded. They had thought this an easy conquest, another weak species to enslave. Instead, they had found themselves staring into the teeth of predators who would not let go. The Varans, trembling in their cities of crystal, understood something powerful that night. The stars had not sent them gentle angels. They had not sent graceful saviors. They had sent Deathworlders, and Deathworlders did not know how to lose. The battle had ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than the sound of guns. The skies above Vera were filled with the wreckage of ships, twisted metal, broken hulls, and drifting bodies that would never return home. Fires burned across the orbit, glowing like red scars against the dark. The Karzul had retreated, their fleet broken, their pride wounded. Vera was saved, but the cost was carved into every heart. The humans had lost many ships. Whole crews were gone, swallowed by the fire of battle. Families across their distant homeworld would never see their sons and daughters again. The Varans watched as human soldiers returned to the surface. Many carried on stretchers. Many wrapped in silence forever. For the gentle people of Vera, who had never known such loss, the sight was unbearable. They wept openly, not only for themselves, but for the strangers who had given their lives so freely. In the great hall, human survivors rested, their bodies broken, but their spirits unyielding. Varan healers moved among them, their delicate hands glowing with soft light. They tried to mend shattered bones, to ease burned flesh, to comfort those in pain. but they were astonished. Even with wounds that would have ended a Varan's life, the humans clung to breath. Their bodies were torn, yet their eyes still burned. A soldier with half his side crushed whispered hoarsely to the healer, "Don't worry about me. Is Vera safe? Did we hold them back?" The healer froze, her tears falling freely. In all her years, she had never seen such will. These beings who bled like rivers thought not of themselves, but of the world they had saved. Another Marine, his arm gone and his face pale, smiled weakly when he saw the children peeking at him from the doorway. "Don't be afraid," he said softly, his voice rough but gentle. "We kept them away. You're safe now." The children ran to their parents, crying, yet they did not look at him as a monster anymore. They looked at him as something greater. In the days that followed, Vera mourned alongside humanity. Crystal towers that once rang with music now echoed with sorrow. Vigils were held under the twin moons. The names of fallen human soldiers were spoken with reverence, etched into crystal walls so that the Varans would never forget them. Leora walked among the wounded often, speaking with the human captain. His uniform was torn, his face marked with scars, yet he carried himself with the same steady strength as before. "Why do you fight like this?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling. "You lost so many. You gave so much, and we had nothing to give you in return." The captain looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were tired, shadowed with grief, but his answer came firm and clear. "Because no one deserves to be left alone in the dark. We know what it means to fight for survival. We know what it means to stand on the edge. When someone cries for help, we answer. That's who we are." Leora's eyes filled with tears. She had thought of humans as predators, as killers shaped by a brutal world. But now she saw the truth. They were not killers by choice. They were fighters because life had demanded it of them. And now they chose to fight not for conquest but for others. The Varans began to change. Where once they had looked at humans with fear, they now looked with gratitude, even admiration. They opened their homes to the soldiers, shared their food, and sang songs of mourning for the fallen. One night, the people gathered in the capital square, holding crystals that glowed softly in the dark. They lifted them high, filling the city with light. The song they sang carried through the night, a song of sorrow and hope, of loss and survival. And among them stood the humans, silent but moved, their scarred hands holding the delicate crystals as though they were treasures. The price of survival had been high. Too many lives had been taken, too many ships lost. But the Varans knew one thing with certainty. They were alive because the humans had come. The stars had answered their plea, not with angels of light, but with warriors forged in fire. And the Varans vowed they would never forget the blood spilled for them. The days after the battle were quiet, almost too quiet. The skies of Vera no longer glowed with enemy fire, but the silence felt heavy, as though the air itself carried the weight of loss. The crystal towers still stood, but many were cracked from falling debris. The ocean still shone, but their gentle waves reflected a sky scarred by wreckage. Yet beneath the sorrow, something new began to grow. The humans walked among the Varans now, no longer shadows hidden behind steel and flame. At first, the people still feared them. They whispered when soldiers passed, clutching their children close. But slowly, fear began to bend into something else. A child, small and trembling, once approached a human Marine sitting near the square. The soldier was repairing a piece of broken armor, his hands rough and scarred. The child stared wide-eyed and whispered, "Were you afraid when you fought them?" The Marine paused, then smiled faintly. "Yes, but courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing anyway." The child touched his scarred hand gently, and for the first time, the people saw a human not as a monster, but as a protector. In the great hall, the Varan leaders met with the human captain once more. His face carried exhaustion, and his uniform bore the marks of battle, but his voice was steady. "The Karzul will return. Not soon, maybe, but they will not forget this defeat. You must prepare. You cannot stay defenseless forever." The council fell silent. They had always built their world on peace, never imagining the need for weapons. But the war had taught them a cruel truth. Peace without strength was fragile. Leora spoke softly, her voice carrying through the hall. "Then teach us. Not to conquer, not to enslave, but to defend. Teach us how to stand as you stood." The captain's eyes met hers, and for a moment the fire in them softened. He nodded once. "We will give you what we can," and so it began. The humans showed the Vayrans not how to wage war, but how to endure. They taught them how to build shields for their cities, how to strengthen their ships, how to stand together when fear threatened to break them. The Vayrans, though fragile in body, proved quick in mind. They learned with eagerness, not out of love for weapons, but out of love for their children's future. At the same time, the Vayrans shared their gifts. They healed the wounds of human soldiers with their gentle arts. They opened their crystal libraries, offering knowledge of science and medicine. They sang songs of memory, teaching humans that even in grief there could be beauty. Slowly, two very different peoples began to weave a bond. But not all was light. Many humans mourned their fallen. In the quiet nights, their songs of remembrance were low and heavy, carrying across the camps like whispers of ghosts. Vayrans joined them, holding glowing crystals in silence, learning the human way of grieving by sharing the weight together. One evening, as the twin moons rose, the human captain stood at the edge of the city, looking toward the stars. Leora approached him, her step soft, her heart uncertain. "Will you leave us soon?" she asked. He did not answer at once. His eyes remained on the dark horizon. Finally he spoke, voice rough with fatigue. "We must. There are others who may call, just as you did. We cannot stay in one place. But remember this, you are not alone anymore. If you cry out again, we will come." Leora's eyes filled with tears. She reached out with her delicate, glowing hand. The captain hesitated, then placed his scarred, rough palm in hers. It was predator and prey, strength and fragility, yet together they formed something neither could hold alone. "Then go," she whispered. "But know this, you will always have a place in our songs." The next morning, the humans began preparing to depart. Their ships, battered but unbroken, rose slowly into the skies. Vayrans gathered in the capital square, watching the dark silhouettes climb into the stars. Some reached out their hands as if to hold the ships back. Others simply stood in silence, hearts heavy with gratitude and sorrow. For though the humans were leaving, their presence would never fade. The memory of their fire, their sacrifice, their unyielding will, these would remain in Veyra forever. A fragile hand had been extended between predator and prey, and in that touch something unshakable had been born. Years passed. The scars of war slowly healed, though they never fully vanished. The crystal towers of Veyra were rebuilt, stronger than before, but some cracks were left untouched, left as reminders of the day when the sky had burned. The Vayrans had changed. They were still gentle, still lovers of peace, but their eyes carried a new kind of strength. They no longer lived in soft trust alone. They trained their youth in defense, built shields around their cities, and patrolled the skies with watchful hearts. They did not seek war, but they no longer feared to stand against it. And at the center of their change was a memory. The humans, the songs of Veyra now, carried stories not only of their ancestors, but also of the strangers from the stars, who had come when no one else had answered. Children grew up hearing about the Deathworlders, beings from a planet so harsh it forged unbreakable souls. They were remembered not as monsters, nor as invaders, but as guardians who had stood in fire when Vayrans could not. In the great library, a glowing crystal stood at the center of the hall. It bore no words, only the imprint of two hands pressed together, one delicate and glowing, one rough and scarred. This was the symbol of the bond, the promise that had been forged in blood and hope. Leora, older now, often stood before it. She would close her eyes and remember the human captain's words. "If you cry out again, we will come." Sometimes she wondered if it had been only a promise to comfort, spoken in the haze of victory and sorrow. But then she looked to the stars and felt in her heart that it had been real. The humans had left, but their shadow remained in every act of courage, in every Veyran who now stood a little taller, who no longer bowed so easily to fear. One night, as the twin moons rose, the people gathered in the capital square. It was the day of remembrance, the day when they honored both their own fallen and the humans who had died to protect them. The Veyran choirs sang a new song, a song born from sorrow, but woven with light. Its verses told of a people who had prayed to the stars, of silence that had nearly broken them, and of the fireborn warriors who had answered. The melody rose like a river, strong and unending, carrying their gratitude into the heavens. High above, the stars glittered. No ship descended, no message answered. Yet the Vayrans believed the humans had heard. Somehow across the endless void, they knew As generations passed, the legend grew. The Deathworlders became more than soldiers in the songs, they became symbols. To the young, they were heroes who proved that even in the darkest hour, someone would stand beside them. To the elders, they were a reminder that peace was a treasure worth guarding, even if it meant sacrifice. And though no human ship returned in their lifetime, the Vayrons never lost hope. Whenever a storm struck or danger loomed, the people whispered the same words: "We are not alone." The Deathworlders taught us to endure. It was a strange truth. Humanity had come from a world of danger, of predators, of endless struggle. Yet it was those very hardships that made them capable of protecting a fragile race who had known only peace. The cruelty of their homeworld had shaped them into shields for others. In the end, the galaxy might never understand the humans fully. Some would always fear them. Some would always call them monsters. But to Veyra, they would forever be remembered as saviors. And so, under the light of twin moons and starlit skies, the Vayrons carried their memory forward. They taught their children the song of the Deathworlders, so that even long after the humans were gone, their story would remain alive. For it was not just a story of war. It was a story of trust, of a fragile hand reaching out and a scarred hand answering, of two worlds so different yet bound by a single truth. Survival meant nothing without hope, and hope meant nothing without someone willing to stand for it. And in that song, sung softly into the night, humanity lived forever.